By the Shadow Chancellor, Sir Mel Stride, who joins us now. So much going on in Iran, of course. And I just wondered if we could start in a way that isn't party political, because I just want to get your honest view on how concerned you are that the global events we're seeing could feed through into the cost of living. Petrol prices, energy bills, supermarket stuff, all that kind of thing.
Undoubtedly, this is a huge external pressure economically that's emerging. It remains to be seen how long it persists, of course, and that's a critical question. But the basic routes by which it'll affect us are firstly into higher energy costs and higher inflation, which will mean that the economy will have to have higher interest rates for longer in order to bring that inflation down, and that will have a negative income effect. People will feel it in their pockets because the Resolution Foundation has said that, for example, this level of elevated energy prices may actually mean bills going up on average by £500 come the summer. It's also affecting stock markets. And it's also will have a downward pressure on global growth, which will affect us as a very open economy. So these are difficult things. The critical thing, though, Sophie, is you can't control any of that, and the Chancellor can't control that, and that's a fair and reasonable point. But what she does have control over is how resilient our economy is in terms of facing up to those kind of challenges. And what we saw yesterday, I'm afraid, was not enough to answer that question.
OK.
Well, let's talk about it. Yeah.
Continuing on the theme of the very, very important cost of living fears that many people will have, you obviously experienced an energy price shock with the Ukraine war, right, the previous Conservative government. What lessons did you learn from that? What genuine lessons did you learn on how best to react as a country? OK,
so it's a combination of fiscal and monetary policy. So in October 2022, inflation peaked at 11.1% as a result of the Ukraine-Russia war and the same kind of dynamics that we're discussing here. So you rely on the Bank of England to take the decisions around interest rates to bring inflation down, and you have an accommodative fiscal policy that doesn't make the problem worse by driving up inflation. Now, on the day of the general election, we had successfully, jointly with the Bank of England, got inflation down to bang on target.
It's fair to say that you've been honest about as well.
We got it down to bang on 2%, which was the target. The problem with the fiscal stance that this government has is they've loaded up taxes on businesses, some of which gets passed on by way of higher prices, and they borrowed and spent vast amounts of money, which is inflationary. So I think that is part of the reason why we've had the highest inflation last year in the G7. The IMF has said that we'll have the highest inflation this year because of the policies of the government.
Just to come in, though, because Rachel Reeves is right when she says inflation's been coming down, it's projected to come down, interest rates have come down, and borrowing costs have come down.
But we're an outlier. So we have had the highest...
That is a fair rebuttal to make.
Of course, as inflation comes down, interest rates will come down, but they have been higher and longer and stayed higher for longer than was necessary.
I'm a little bit frustrated for you and Labour. Whenever inflation comes down, it's because of the great policies you've done. Whenever it goes up, it's because the factor's completely out of your control. It just feels a little bit, come on, guys.
But let's get to the way in which you framed it. OK, so back in October 2022, very high inflation. We were not an outlier compared to other countries, OK? There was an external shock and everybody's inflation went up, and we brought it down in the way that I described, to bang on target on the day of the general election. What we're looking at now with inflation is we are an outlier. We have the highest inflation in the G7, and the reason for that is the inflationary policies of this government, and the government does have control over those factors.
Right, let's move on, because I want to talk to you about Donald Trump. Donald Trump yesterday said he's going to cut off all trade with Spain because they're not letting the US use their air bases for the war in Iran. Are you comfortable with the president, using economic sanctions against other democracies who don't agree with his military action?
Look, it's a matter for the US president to take those decisions. However, I have to say in general terms, the use of tariffs in the way that they have been used, not least if you look at Greenland, threatening NATO partners taking over Greenland, and if they don't, then there'll be trade consequences, is, I don't think, the right way to go. I think what we should be doing is actually getting tariffs down, particularly given the pressures around the Iranian war at the moment. We should be getting those tariff walls and barriers down so that we can get trade moving, and then we all benefit from that.
Finally, I just wanted to ask about your House of Commons performance yesterday, because you're becoming quite theatrical, I think, as adjective that I'd use in the way that you kind of respond at the dispatch box. Round and round we go like a fiscal twister, ripping up everything in its path. Rachel Reeves is like a dodgy estate agent standing in a crumbling building. Are you like this at home?
I do like Shakespeare, actually, although we don't do much Shakespeare at home. Look, the House of Commons is a particular bear pit, OK? And I'm facing about 350 to 400 MPs opposite me, all bellowing at me. You don't even hear it on television, actually. And part of cutting through, I think, sometimes is about using imagery and things that stick in the mind and so on. And a lot of what you've just read out there has been picked up by the press. And I think many people in this country believe summarises exactly what's going on.
How do you write the stuff? Do you have like a thesaurus next to you? You've got the complete works of Shakespeare?
I just sit down and I think about what is it I'm trying to communicate. And in this case, it was complacency, self-congratulation, no plan for the future, which is what we saw yesterday from the Chancellor. And how do I convert that into something that people are going to remember and indeed discuss just as we are now?
A fiscal twister. There you go.
Yeah.
Mel Stride,
Ripping up.
thank you very much indeed.